All right, so let's try that again. So welcome on, Eli Bremer, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this for us. And I just want to share with people a little bit about your background. So Eli is a Olympic pentathlete. He was a member of the U.S. Olympic team in 2008. He's a three-time Pan American champion, a World Cup final bronze medalist, a 12-time world team member, a World Military Games gold medalist, a U.S. Air Force Academy graduate, and he was a former U.S. Air Force major. He has a master's degree from the George Washington University and the University of Colorado. Eli was featured in the National Geographic feature film, The Incredible Human Machine, and he is considered one of the fastest short distance run swim athletes in history. He is currently the captain of the Shaklee Pure Performance team and has presented to over 200,000 worldwide. And he's going to be speaking on, in my opinion, what he knows best, and he's the expert on what he's going to share with you tonight. And so without further ado, welcome on Eli Bremer.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate that. And thanks everybody for coming out tonight. And I know we've got probably a number of different time zones represented here. So great connecting with everybody. I'll start with a little bit about my background, how I got involved with Shaklee, and then we're going to move right into a sports science presentation. Because a lot of people are like, okay, what was your background? How did you get involved with this? I grew up wanting to become an athlete, and when I was about 14 years old, I sort of hit an inflection point, went from being the last kid you'd ever pick on a sports team, and I started becoming a much more serious athlete. To the point where by the time I finished high school, I was the fastest swimmer in my city's history and was a Division I recruit in both running and swimming. And it was during that time that I actually started getting involved with Shaklee because we were introduced to Shaklee through some friends, and my mom has a doctorate in human nutrition. So she took a look at it and said, yeah, I think this can help your athletic performance. So that, I really go back about 25 years with this company. Fast forward a number of years, I started developing some physiological problems associated with distance running called heel strike anemia. And I was crushing red blood cells in my feet doing the extreme running mileage that I was doing combined with fencing. And turned to a number of different sources, couldn't find a solution. Eventually came back to Shaklee, and they had a high potency iron complex that was able to get me get that solved for me. But the real reason I stuck with the company over the years was because of product purity. In the Olympics, you get drug tested ballpark once a month, and we're under the most strict drug testing protocols in the world. And about 2002, the Olympics worldwide adopted a no advance notice 24/7, 365 drug testing policy, which meant that you could be drug tested at any time of the day. And additionally, if you were found with anything illegal in your system, you would get a sanction that would last at least through the next Olympics. So it's called strict liability. Even if it got there without your knowledge, you're considered complicit. And so it was during that time that I started doing a lot more research about Shaklee and discovered that they're an ultra pure product line, really on par with like a pharmacy grade product. And that's why I sort of really leaned into this as I became one of the best athletes in the world, because I knew I could trust them that they didn't have contaminants in their products. Fast forward a few more years past when I competed in the Olympics, I started a partnership with a company called Pure Performance, where we work with Olympic athletes. Every last one's under these drug testing protocols, and we provide them world-class products that help their performance, that help them naturally become the best athletes in the world. We've worked with somewhere around 130 athletes. We've got 93 in our program right now. Everyone's an Olympian. The last Summer Olympics, we won 13 gold medals. So we're one of the really big premier sports programs in the country right now in the Olympics. And the reason for that is, again, we have a product line that athletes feel comfortable about taking when they're being drug tested, number one. And number two, these athletes need to perform at the top of the world. And so, they're trying to reach the pinnacle of human performance naturally. So that's sort of what the company's about. That's what I do with Shaklee, and why I've chosen to partner with them. And so anyway, without further ado now, I'd like to actually move over, and I'm gonna do a screen share here because I want to get into this. I understand we got a lot of people who are into fitness and sports, and And I'm going to do a screen share here, and hopefully this will work. If you can confirm once I load this that you can see. Are you seeing a presentation there, Liz?
Yep.
Great. All right, so I'm gonna, it's my understanding we got a lot of folks here that are interested in the science of working out. And this has been something that's a passion of mine, working with so many Olympians, plus my own discovery. You know, I was one of the fastest short distance run swim athletes in history. Like Liz said in the introduction, I was featured in the National Geographic feature film, The Incredible Human Machine, alongside Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. It was his vocal cords. It was my cardiovascular system. They had the Navy Blue Angels on for the extreme G's that they pulled during their sort of trick flying. So, you know, so I was heavily recognized for my extreme fitness and extreme training. And part of that was studying physiology and the impacts of physiology and nutrition. So in light of learning how little knowledge there was, even with a lot of elite athletes, I wanted to sort of put together something that would explain in some somewhat basic terms, but very useful terms, what actually happens while we work out and the impact nutrition can have on that. So we'll start with that question: what actually happens when you work out? And I'd like to start with energy. You know, how does your body utilize energy? If you're a gym type of person, you probably recognize this slide here. These are the training zones, and different entities have different titles for this, but you're going to more or less get the same slide. So if you look over here on the y-axis, this is beats per minute as a percentage of your maximum heart rate. And then on the x-axis on top, we've got your age. Generally accepted, these are ballpark numbers. Your maximum heart rate is about 200 or 220 minus your age. So when you're 20 years old, it's around 200. These are ballpark numbers. 30, it's 190, 40, 180, and so on. So these training zones, as I said, these are pretty reasonable, but they do everything here is somewhat dependent on the individual. So don't get too worried about the exact numbers, more the concepts. We start with light activity, then we move into a low aerobic zone, and then a higher aerobic zone, then a lactic acid and threshold zone, and then we move on to a zone called VO2 max. So pretty straightforward. You've probably seen that before. Let's start actually looking, though, about what happens in each of these zones, what energy source you're using, and how many calories you're training or you're burning. So you know, this is sort of the warm-up activity. This would be walking, and you're using blood glucose and fat as an energy source. Actually, sorry, this would even be pre-warm-up, and you're burning maybe 100 to 200 calories an hour. As you move up more into the low aerobic, this would be again a warm-up zone. You're using blood glucose. You're using a carbohydrate stored in your system called glycogen, and you're burning fat. And that's going to be, depending on the person and all that, maybe 300 to 500 calories an hour. As we move up farther, and I'm just using running as an example because it's one usually everyone can relate to, but this can be any type of physical activity. You're burning consumed carbohydrates, things that you're eating while you're running, glycogen and fat. And this is the last zone we're going to burn fat in. That's the definition of aerobic is we're using oxygen and burning fat. And you can see we're burning 600 to 750 calories an hour. As we get up into the anaerobic zone, this is typically going to be more of your intervals. And we're changing now to really utilizing glycogen as a primary source, along with consumed carbohydrates, which take the form of glucose in your blood. But you've burned through whatever you had at the start of the workout in this zone. So only what you're consuming plus your glycogen equal your capability to produce energy in the anaerobic zone. The last piece is a VO2 max. That would be 100% glycogen. You sort of hit the exponential side of the curve here. It's probably well north of 1,500 or more calories an hour, but it's unsustainable. You can handle this for, I think 90 seconds, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. You go into an exponential production of lactic acid, and your body will then effectively start shutting down and kick you back into sort of one of these lower zones once you reach your VO2 max. so let's talk about glycogen for a second. Glycogen is a stored carbohydrate energy source in the human body. You're gonna find it in your muscles. You're gonna find it in your liver. But it is a unique, really interesting energy source that we have. One of the world leading researchers on this for elite athletes is Dr. Gennady Sokolovas, who is partnered with Shaklee. He's our pure performance team physiologist. He's coached over 110 Olympic gold medalists and currently consults for a number of Olympic committees. I think he's working with 2 Olympic committees next month over in Europe. So he works worldwide with some of the big Olympic committees on sports physiology. But most importantly, he has the research on the correlation between high-intensity training and glycogen depletion in elite athletes. Though we've kind of known the processes until Dr. Sokolovas started doing live testing. He developed a protocol for pricking athletes' ears during workouts, rapidly drawing blood from the earlobe, and then measuring it on the site for lactic acid production. He was able to extrapolate out how much glycogen was being used in hard cardiovascular workouts. So how do you deplete your glycogen? Well, if you look over here on the y-axis here, this is going to show your percentage of glycogen content in your body. So if I start with 100% and I exercise heavily, so think about that the anaerobic zone, the interval sort of zone, and VO2 max, I'm going to deplete just about all my glycogen in about an hour. Now, again, give or take what type of fitness you're in. Your body does adapt, and a highly trained athlete's going to take longer. So this is more of a rule of thumb just to show you how this is working. If you're in one of the more moderate zones, it's going to take quite a bit longer. The high aerobic zone, for instance, you could deplete in about an hour and 20 minutes. 120 minutes, 2 hours. And if you notice up here at the top, the light exercise zone, you're really not depleting your glycogen very much at all. At 2 hours, you've barely got any depletion. Why is that? That's because we're really burning through fat at the lower zones. And in years past, scientists used to say, if you want to lose weight, if you want to burn fat, only exercise in the lower zones because that's what you're burning during that time. But we now know that you actually burn more calories and therefore more fat eventually by training the higher intensity zones. So interesting point there about how our knowledge has changed over time. And this slide is a great slide that sort of demonstrates your glycogen depletion. All right, well, let's take a look at muscles. So that's another thing that you utilize during workouts. What happens? What's the impact on your muscles during and after workout? You get disruption of the muscle fibers. You're going to get tearing of the muscle. You break down. You get inflammation. You get trauma, stress, and damage. So that's what you actually do to a muscle. I could go in deeper detail about the actual mechanics of all this, but this is the actual impact to a muscle at virtually every level. When you utilize a muscle, this is pretty much what's going to happen. So if we summarize these two systems, your sort of energy system, your muscular system, and say what actually happens when you work out, well, your stored energy is going to be depleted. Your muscles are torn down, and you're weaker than you were before. So focus on this for a second and think about it. At the end of a workout, you have less energy in your body, and your muscles are weaker and more torn down. So you are worse physically after a workout than you were before. So it begs the question, why the heck do we work out? It's a very interesting question. Why would you want to be weaker after a workout? And the answer is because stress has a very positive impact on our bodies. Why is that? Because our bodies, the human body, naturally wants to rebuild as a response to stress. So the nutrition you consume during and after a workout actually has more impact than what you eat beforehand. And that's because nutrients are the construction materials your body needs to rebuild stronger. This is a really interesting concept, and it took me a long time. I remember the head physiologist at the Olympic Committee sat me down at one point and said, Eli, working out is nothing, recovery is everything. And I was a good athlete at the time, and I didn't believe him. A few years later, I was one of the best athletes in the world, and that's what I lived by. Everything is about recovery. In fact, I made a big change around in 2004, 2005. I'd been final to the World Championships. I was a good athlete. I wanted to be one of the greatest ever, one of the great ones in my sport. And one of the things I did was I rearranged my schedule, my eating, everything. I built the recovery first, and then I built the training into the recovery. That's how important this is. So let's look at why that is. So typically, this is actually, I would say, the most common way people work out. They work out at 100%. Then their recovery, let's say, is right here at 70%. And so that's really their total benefit. On the other hand, if you work out at 100% and you recover at 100%, your total benefit is going to be much, much higher. And that's because the total benefit is actually the lesser of your workout or your recovery. If you take away just a couple points from this presentation, this is potentially one of the most important ones. Because what I see almost everywhere, whether you're fitness athletes or high-performing athletes, is a huge emphasis on working out really hard, but we just don't pay as much attention to the recovery process. As I was an elite athlete, and I've worked with many elite athletes since, this is the key to unlocking the next piece of your potential. Elite athletes get this, and that's one of the things that sets them apart. So let's talk about how you rebuild in two different areas, in energy rebuilding and muscular rebuilding. In a very basic way, you rebuild your energy by replenishing your glycogen with appropriate carbohydrates, and you engage in muscle building by creating new muscle with appropriate proteins. So let's look at how that actually happens. There's more pieces than this. I've glossed over a couple things, but this gives a very good idea in basic terms of what's going to happen when you eat a carbohydrate. So you're going to consume a carbohydrate. It goes to your GI tract, which sends it into your blood as blood glucose. Now, what's really interesting is over the last number of years, people have very conscious of carbohydrates. We've seen a fad of low carbohydrate diets, and I actually support that for sedentary people. So remember here, we're talking about athletics, we're talking about working out, we're talking about sports physiology here. So I want to show you, though, why potentially it's actually not a bad thing for sedentary people to be low carbohydrate. Because if you're sedentary, then that blood glucose is actually converted to fat. That excess blood glucose, your body secretes insulin. We've all heard of insulin, and insulin clears excess glucose out of the blood, and it's preferentially stored as fat. But what's really interesting, and what hasn't really gotten enough attention, especially in the athletic community, is post a cardiovascular workout when you're in a depleted glycogen state, you actually convert your excess blood glucose into glycogen. So sort of a basic question right now, are carbohydrates bad for you? And the answer is it really depends on when you eat them, because there's a big difference right here between what happens if you haven't been working out versus if you're in a glycogen depleted state. So let's look at what happens when we rebuild muscle next. You start by consuming protein. It goes to your GI tract and your liver, where it's broken into amino acids. From there, it gets sent to your bloodstream. Your bloodstream carries it to the muscles. And in a post-workout environment, you rebuild your old muscle and you build new muscle. So that's pretty much the path of a protein after you eat it. So two different paths between your carbohydrates and proteins. Are all nutrients created equal? The answer is clearly no. They do different functions, and then quality makes a big difference as well. A sugar is not a sugar is not a sugar. So it's very important, the quality. Workout type, intensity, and duration then define your individual needs. So for an optimal nutrition and physiological program, you really need to look at what you're actually doing and then consume food during and after to eat to those needs. At Shaklee, we developed the sports products that are designed for every level of athletics. I was part of the board that developed these products a couple of years ago, and I really struggled with how do you provide every athlete with the recovery from every workout. And the more I thought about it, the more I said, gee, we've got to have something that brackets we got brackets carbohydrates. So I'm going to talk about that now. We got two lines. That's how we came up with this. The fitness line, which is a low carbohydrate product, and an endurance line, which is a high carbohydrate product. So sort of based on whether or not your workout, you eat your workout is cardiovascular in nature or more muscular in nature. Now, actually, I'm going to go to this slide next, and then I'll go back to that one. What I sort of suggest is, as people are looking at their during and after workouts, you look at what you're consuming here for fuel. So, blood glucose and fat. And then over here, I've got sort of the correlating, a lower carbohydrate type product would be, if you're really not burning much glycogen, then realistically you don't need to replenish it. So you need a low carbohydrate fuel, if you will, for that. On the other hand, when you get into these hard interval runnings, your carbohydrate consumption is actually going to go up. Therefore, you need more. This is the endurance product line that I've replicated up here, which is the high carbohydrate line. So I'm going to go back now and look at how these products were actually set up, because I think this is pretty cool for how we built this for any level of athlete to target their nutrition. If you look over here, I've got my protein and carbohydrate calories on each product, and you can see that here we have a low carbohydrate version of everything. This is an energized product, something you take before. Hydrate product, something you take during. So these have roughly the same electrolyte content, but the difference is 10 calories of carbohydrates versus 100 calories over here. So this is a very high octane dextrose blend that's designed to give you sustained energy during a vascular workout. When you get down into the build products, which are more traditionally called recovery products, you can see this is a 7-to-1 protein to carbohydrate ratio. It's just about an isolate. And this is a 3-to-1 carbohydrate to protein. So that's how these were designed. This is a high carbohydrate more for cardiovascular, low carbohydrate more for muscular type workouts or lower intensity workouts. So again, if we go back over to here, this starts making a little more sense. As we go up, we need more carbohydrates up on intensity. But what would you do then if you're doing something, let's say like CrossFit, which is hard intervals, but it's also pretty muscular? Well, the reason we created these the way we did was to be able to be blended. So let's take the hydrate product, which is designed to be used during a workout for hydration. Let's say that you're not sure that you're doing a moderate intensity. You can actually blend these. The flavors align. So you can target and say get a 50-calorie sports drink with all the electrolytes. So you're not going to sacrifice the electrolytes, but you can actually target the carbohydrates so that you're mirroring your carbohydrate expenditure and being able to work out harder but not have an excess amount of carbohydrates. The same is true down here. These products are capable of being added together or blended so that on the one hand, you get a 7-to-1 ratio of protein to carbohydrates. Over here, you got a 3-to-1 of carbohydrate to protein. Now, why would you have protein in a rebuilding product if you're cardiovascular? Well, the answer is at every level you are using muscles. You can't really burn calories without utilizing muscles, including your heart muscle. And so it's really important to feed them, even in an extreme cardiovascular environment, some protein. So these can be blended together and get really anywhere in between. And you target the workout recovery with a targeted nutritional solution. So I think that's really cool. I have yet to see another product that functions like this, that can actually hit any level of performance. So if I go back to this slide now, what's really important here is you should eat and consume the products relative to the workout you're doing that day. So if you're doing a really hard interval run, you need to consume a lot more carbohydrates, and you're going to be up here on the high carbohydrate, lower protein side. On the other hand, let's say you're doing a weightlifting practice or a hot yoga or something like that. You need the lower carbohydrates, and you might need higher protein depending on how hard you work your muscles. So, I think that's extremely important to remember, because you want to feed your body, again, what it needs to rebuild. And that's the absolute key. So let's look at some key takeaways from this. The total workout benefit is the lesser of the workout or the recovery. I sort of call that Eli's first law of sports. Carbohydrates and protein serve different purposes. This has been largely misunderstood. I've had conversations with people that'll go running for an hour, do hard interval run, and then drink 25 grams of protein and not take any carbohydrates. You ask them, how do you feel the next day? And they say, terrible. Well, that's because carbohydrates are utilized to rebuild your glycogen supplies, proteins utilized to rebuild your muscle. And lastly, consumption during and after workout, excuse me, is actually more important than before. This is important as if you want to get the most out of your workout. I recommend that people spend all of their effort, whether it's a budget that you're on or a caloric, pay attention to what you're consuming during the workout now, much, much more so than before. So, and then finally, carbohydrates act differently depending on when they're consumed. Again, I completely agree with low carbohydrates or moderate carbohydrates in the absence of working out if you're sedentary. But if you are working out, especially if you want to be a high performance athlete, if you're, again, even a CrossFit athlete, this is your great hobby, your passion, or you just like going to the Y, whatever it is, you got to understand the carbohydrates act differently depending on when they're consumed. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that we might have coming in. Questions about this, questions about other sports training, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Eli. That was jam-packed. And so while people are putting their questions in the chat, one of the questions that came to mind for me was the percentage of total workout and percentage of recovery. So if somebody is not recovering at a high percentage and they continue to work out, is that when injuries occur? So maybe their intensity is still just as intense, but they're not always getting to that 100% recovery. Can injuries happen more readily? Yeah.
Am I still on screen share here?
Yep.
Okay. So this slide really demonstrates that pretty well. Here's what happens. So if I start on day one, week one, month one, whatever unit of time you want to use, and I'm working out at 100%, my total benefit's down here. This is one of the things that leads to what has traditionally been called overtraining. And in elite sports, we typically don't use that word. We actually say you're not overtrained, you're under-recovered. One of the big problems with overtraining or under-recovery is injuries. Now, that's not to say, I have plenty of injuries, and when you're training really, really hard, that's going to happen. It happens a lot more when your body's worn down, because if I recover to 70% and then I try to punch through back up here to 100%, but I'm still only recovering, I'm just wearing everything down. So your muscles, for instance, can get overtaxed unevenly. That causes mechanical imbalances. That can lead to stress fractures. It can lead to lots of problems. Say that if you recover completely, you're not going to get injured. That's not. I can never promise that. What I can say is if you recover better, if you take that really seriously, your injury rates will absolutely be lower because your body is rebuilding and you're giving it a fighting chance to do its job.
Okay, great. And so in line with that, we have a question from Shaklee in regards to a high school athlete. So a high school athlete coming from a point of an injury that they already have, how do they maximize recovery?
I would say it depends on what type of injury. I mean, especially if you're dealing with a muscular injury, you got to make sure you got enough protein. But in general, I would say starting with a proper balanced diet and nutrition, that is absolutely key, because an injury, your body again wants to heal from injuries. If you don't give your body the building blocks it needs, then you're really, here's a good slide on that one. It's the construction material. What happens is the longer you have an injury, the more things like scarring you're going to get, and that's going to exacerbate it and take it longer and longer to heal. So it's not, proper nutrition is not going to be the sole thing you need to heal an injury, but it is absolutely a contributing piece to getting over stuff faster. Because if your body's got what it needs to, again, our bodies just want to build themselves. And so if you give it everything it's going to need to do, it will tend to want to do it more. That doesn't excuse or massage or whatever the other rehabilitative things you're doing. But a lot of times people do that. They forget the proper diet, and then they're they're not feeding their body what it takes to grow.
Okay, great. Another question. I think this question is it's a fabulous question. And just to add to it before I give you the question, I think a lot of times when we look at there's a question about the food only approach. And I think a lot of times when it comes from fitness people or gym owners, they're afraid to recommend supplementation, protein powders, products because of the issues in the nutrition industry. And of course, we now know the Shaklee difference of why you take the Shaklee products. But this question is from Stephen, and he says, what would you say to a food-only approach to recovery? Protein takes a long time to absorb from food compared to, say, a supplemental quality product, say like Shaklee. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I'll throw these up again and give my sort of take on them. What are you getting on each of these? On the energized products, you're getting sort of a boost, a natural caffeinated boost. Trying to get that through food is going to be unbelievably hard. As you get down here into the hydration piece, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible. I've never seen a food approach inside hydration because you got to be consuming this during. You could potentially try to eat fruit, but it's very inefficient. Athletes tend to prefer things we can drink because it's easier on your stomach and it absorbs really fast. That's what gets you down here into the build products. Now, when you look at recovery and rebuilding, time is extremely key. And so when I was at the peak of my abilities and I'd do a hard workout, we would do sometimes 2.5 hour treadmill workouts where I was probably burning over 2,500 calories in a single workout. I would actually have 2 bottles of Build Plus, it was called Physique at the time, it's been rebranded, waiting at the treadmill. I would start as soon as the hardest part of the workout was done, I would start consuming that. Now, if I had to try to eat a food, there's just no way with my stomach all tied up that I could have gotten that into my system. And it would have been, now my body's having to break down the fibers and stuff in it. So I'd much prefer the liquid form of delivery because it gets into your system a whole lot faster. And when it comes to rebuilding, minutes absolutely matter. Every unit of time you're waiting longer, it takes longer for your body to rebuild and recover. So getting that maximum out of the workout, you need to be consuming something immediately after. Again, for the vast majority of people, that means it's got to be liquid because trying to consume a meal and then digest it and getting everything balanced right in that's just not practical, especially if if you have a life and you're running around and you have to go run errands after your workout or whatever you're doing. So for practical reasons plus for digestive reasons, I think it just works a whole lot better to use a powder. I honestly don't know a single elite athlete that has a food only approach.
Yeah, and if you look at the way that these products are put together scientifically, it's probably difficult to get that in the way of, say, food with the time factor involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at delivering a quick 300 to 400 calorie recovery. Trying to get a balanced meal at the gym is I mean, honestly, I just can't see it happening.
Okay. And then another question from Stephen, thoughts on preloading electrolytes versus post workouts?
You're not going to get hurt with some preloading. I think the answer is yes. Electrolytes are difficult to sort of OD on. So there's no problem with drinking them ahead of time. The issue that some people have, myself included, is when you start getting into the higher calorie electrolyte drinks, if you're drinking that too early, it will spike your blood sugar unnecessarily, and then it has a different response, which is, again, why it's great to have a low-calorie version that you can utilize. Allows you to, again, you could blend it. I start drinking a high-calorie electrolyte drink maybe 15, 20 minutes before. If I drink it 45 minutes before, then you might spike your blood sugar a little bit and crash going into a workout. So I'd be cognizant of that.
Okay. Question from Karen. When you have an injury, is it true that the body will spend a lot more energy in healing, redirecting food to help heal, and whatever is left goes to your workout?
That's a bit of an extreme statement. There's a lot of truth in it. But yes, it will take more effort to rebuild. And that has to do with, think of it more in terms of rebuilding. In the same way that you damage your muscle, if you break a bone, you need different minerals to rebuild that bone. So yes, you're going to have to consume more of that. That does not necessarily mean it's going to take tons and tons of calories, but your body will prioritize different things over time, and one of those is injury, dealing with injuries.
Great. Well, I think that's all we have for questions. I'll just want to say to everyone, you heard a little piece of, we're almost at the end of our time here. I want to not take up any more of Eli's time, but you heard a little piece of what Eli said in the beginning about the Shaklee difference, and that's the reason he's been using these products for so many years. So if you want more detail on the Shaklee difference, please talk to the person that invited you to this call tonight, and they can provide some of the detail that sets these products apart within, of course, this vast nutrition industry that we're part of. And unfortunately, Health Canada requires industry standards, and Shaklee has gone way above industry standards for many years because of the issue with contamination and quality. So thank you, Eli, for answering these questions.
Quick on that. Again, if you look at, if you Google Shaklee athletes, you can see which athletes were actually using these. To be very clear, we don't pay these athletes a ton of money to endorse Shaklee. Basically, they get a lot of free products from us. So this year, we've gotten, as I said, 93 Olympians we're working with. I think we got about 6 or 7 from Canada right now. So for all of you, I don't know, I'm guessing most of you, if not all, are Canadians. We have now been working with a number of Canadian athletes. That's been very rewarding. And these are athletes that are, nearly some have recently retired, but they're under these strict drug testing protocols. And this year, we're budgeting about $350,000 of products that they're consuming. So that's the Shaklee difference for us, that these products work. They can stand up to the most rigorous drug testing in the world.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you so much, Eli, for sharing. And thank you, everyone, for coming on the call tonight. And again, touch base with the person that invited you here, and they can provide you with more information. Oh, and Julie Veenstra just had a comment. She says, maybe you need to get the Canadian women's hockey team on Shaklee, Eli.
Yeah. That's a sore point. We got the hockey team. We got the curling team. So we're going to run into some dicey situations in the summer with that too. But it's been fun growing some relationships in Canada. We had some great relationships in a few different sports, in biathlon and then in figure skating. And then what's oftentimes happened is, we're not a sponsor that throws around big sums of money and attracts people that way. So what winds up happening is we get a lot of people who just hear about us through other Olympians, and they contact us and say, hey, we'd like to work with you. So if you got a couple other questions, by the way, I see the chat just blew up a little bit. I got a couple more minutes, I could answer a couple more questions if they're in there.
I think it blew up because they loved the hockey comment.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have that turned on. I just saw that. Yeah, I will. I promise that the next Winter Olympics are in Beijing, which is where I competed at the Summer Olympics. So we'll be working with a lot more athletes going into that, and I wouldn't be surprised if we have some of your women's hockey team working with us.
Yeah, and I will say I do love the definition of what Shaklee calls endorsement for their athletes, and that is providing them with the products. Yes. That's a huge difference between what some other companies are doing as far as payment.
So anyway, well, thank you all for your time. Appreciate that. And you can ping me on Facebook if you want. Shoot me a Facebook invite. I'm pretty good about accepting most of those unless I have no mutual friends, because I get a lot of spammers on there. But if you got any follow-on questions, shoot me on Facebook as well.
Awesome. All right. We're going to end it there. And thanks again, Eli, and take care.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Excellent.